my shows. Oh. Oh, okay. This here?
These
Oh.
ones right here. So that one will go forward.
Okay, super. Thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah. Buddies. Back in the woods.
Used to. My brother had.
Check, check. Check, check. Hey, hey.
Late for
Late,
that.
yeah.
Hey, hey. Check 1, 2.
Rick, no.
People, we try to keep everything.
Hey, hey. Check 1, 2. You're good.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Glendale City Council Workshop Session of November 24, 2020. This meeting is called to order. Roll call is not necessary. Everybody is in attendance, so we do have a quorum. With that, Ms. Bauer, would you introduce item number 1?
Fund balance and community investment strategy follow-up.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Here to provide the staff report on this, Assistant City Manager Jack Friedline.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps, Mayor, City Council. This presentation refers to the fund balance from the CARES Act presentation we gave to you a couple of weeks ago. There were 3 different projects that City Council asked us to come back and give a little bit more detail to, so you could review it and possibly approve it, gain a consensus so we can move forward with it. The first project is the Adult Center over on 59th Avenue. We recommended a $20,000 allocation to take a look at the second floor of that building, which is only roughed in. There's mostly concrete and ductwork there. It's around 19,000 square feet, and it could be a good transitional space when the city decides to move forward with rehabbing City Hall. One of the floors on City Hall is less than that, maybe around 15,000 square feet. So if we decided to do major overhaul of City Hall, this could be an opportunity. Secondly, the programming would also include working with Jim Burke and his team with reference to future programming of that facility for those purposes with reference to Parks and Rec and the Adult Center, which would come back to the City Council for review. Is there any questions with reference to this particular item?
No,
Mayor, I have
I'd
a
like to see this thing move forward. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand what these numbers are saying. I mean, I look at it, it says remaining fund balance. What does that mean exactly?
Vice Mayor, the remaining fund balance is the balance of the CARES dollars. It was around 19 point something million that we spoke to and identified many projects. That was the balance after we were finished making the presentation. And it also reflected these 3 projects that we talked about, and City Council asked for more information.
We talked about this about a month ago, and it was the money that was left. So we were trying to figure out where do we appropriate.
Okay, so I get that. Then it's the second line says second floor programming. What does that mean exactly?
Correct, Vice Mayor. This is gaining an architect consultant to work with us. The second floor currently is just roughed out. It's open.
The Adult Center.
Right at the Adult Center.
So are we basically saying that this money now is ready for us to allocate elsewhere, or what are you telling us?
This 20, yeah, of the $378,000, we're recommending using 20,000 of it to gain a consultant to do programming for the second floor of the Adult Center.
And the remaining balance stays for that project for later use?
No, the next slide will show
Next slide.
Okay.
the new
All right.
balance.
I just want to understand how there was flowing. It didn't make sense. Thank
I
you.
should have explained that, apologize. So yes, Mayor.
So just to be clear, this 20,000, if we should decide to utilize this 20,000, it would be just to come up with concepts and do some preliminary design work as to what might be possible on that second floor.
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And as a process, what we did, and there'll be, when I'm finished, there'll still be a balance, just so you know, with the 3 projects. What we did a month ago is we reviewed each one, and as we did, if the City Council thought it appropriate, they gave consensus at that point. So if you're ready to give consensus, we can move forward. If not, we can wait
I
until
think it'd be
the end.
easier doing that. So is there a consensus on the Adult Center? Okay.
Okay, good. The second project was painting the entryway fencing and structure at Saguaro Ranch Park, including the fencing that runs from the gate north on 59th Avenue to the end of the fence, and also the Mountain View alignment that goes from the main gate west to the parking lot. We estimated that at $57,000. And I would ask that if, depending on the bid that we get, if we stay within the $57,000, that we could just continue expanding that on there's more fencing at the end of Mountain View north into the park. So,
I do have a question for you on that. A couple of years ago, when we were having a lot of problems, or maybe it's been longer, it seemed like a couple of years ago, with an arsonist, I talked with a couple of staff out at Squirrel Ranch Park, and they told me some of the areas with the fence were so wide that people could actually go between the bars without an issue. So my question on painting, has that all been resolved before you start painting it? In other words, is the fence close enough where people can't get in?
Mayor, I don't know the answer to that question, but the fact that you brought it up will ensure that we'll inspect the fence to make sure there's no openings like that. I drove it this morning and I didn't see anything, but I wasn't looking for those kind of issues, but
Okay.
we'll
And
make
I-
sure.
Yeah, I certainly would support, that's sort of the pride and joy of Glendale, and we want to keep it looking nice, but if it's got wide enough gaps for people to slip through, we don't want to paint it and then come back and weld it and then have to repaint again, so.
So,
Any other questions on this one?
Mayor,
Go ahead.
I appreciate staff having looked at this and council's consideration. The 59th Avenue and the Mountain View road legs are highly visible. They're really kind of just a beginning in what needs to be painted there. If you've been out there between the largest parking lot and the historic area, the primer coat of the fence is showing through the black, the red that was the primer coat. It just kind of continues all the way through that black fencing that secures the historic area, the barnyard area, and then runs up by the somewhat behind the library. So we could look at this as a start, or maybe if there's money left after we looked at the other things we talked about, we could increase this amount some. Maybe if the bids come in, good and competitive, that we could, help stretch dollars to actually see if we can't get even more of that painted out there. Thank you.
All right, you need a consensus?
yes, sir.
Consensus? Yeah.
Okay. The third and last project, starting with a $301,000 balance, shows an economic development position, and I believe I have passed around the job specifications for that position for each one of you. What this slide shows is $131,075 for that position. Actually, in looking at the expenditure for this as a project in this budget year, that would only reflect half of that if the person could be hired by January 1st. So it's closer to $65,000. And then we put in an estimate of $20,000 for furniture, equipment, and a couple of walls being built on the second floor to expand the ECDev offices. So with that $65,000 difference, you still have a remaining balance of about $210,000.
Mayor?
Yeah.
Mr. Friedline, why are we spending one-time money for an ongoing position?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Clark, this was a request made by a council member, and so it was discussed at our last workshop regarding what to do with the remaining unallocated fund balance or the excess fund balance. Generally, we have stuck to the process of one-time dollars going towards one-time projects, but in this case, I believe Councilmember Tomachoff was the initial request on it, but I think because the COVID monies could be advantageous to our business community who are struggling during this community, that would be an appropriate time. In talking to our economic development team, What they indicated, they believe this position would be of high value long-term. And so it would be my intention that if the council gave consensus to move forward, that I would build this position into next year's budget. It would just be part of our general operating budget. But that's where this kind of started from.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Generally, I don't support using one-time funding for financing positions that are ongoing. So I would tend not to support that in light of the fact that staff is prepared to introduce this item as part of our regular budget process coming up in a couple of months. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Tomachoff.
Thank you, Mayor. And I agree with you under normal circumstances, but we're not functioning under normal circumstances right now. And this is the one thing that we're doing for the business community with some of this CARES money is to this person will actually be a contact point person. Rather than trying to do grants and some of the things the other cities are doing, there's still a lot of other money available. There's other things that this position I think could help us with is tracking. Kevin and I have had some conversations about possibly trying to work with the commercial real estate brokers on coming up with maybe some ideas on how we inventory and make our vacant spaces more attractive. We're going to end up with a lot of vacancies around the city. There's a lot of things happening that are unprecedented, and I hate using that word, but so I felt like it would be advantageous to us and to the business community to launch this position now because it's needed now. Waiting until June, we would have a person that would be literally sort of a point person for the business community.
Mr. Phelps, I'd like to ask you a question. Is this person going to be a full-time employee, or is this going to be a contract position?
Mayor, members of the council, we envision this being a full-time position. Again, after the initial request came in from to look at this further, in discussions with Brian and Jesse, they recognized that they actually were preparing to make a request at some point in the future to have this position filled. So I think it definitely would be a full-time person. We want to train, get our person on board, let them kind of understand the Glendale way, and I mean that in all seriousness, that our team has incredibly good chemistry and work well together. And we believe the things that this person will be able to assist the business community on will be relevant not only this budget year, but in future budget years. So I think having a full-time employee here is how we would recommend doing it. Obviously, the council has the final say.
Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Precisely what you just said I was going to mention. You were very skeptical when the council member brought that up. Then you said you reached out to your staff, and your staff said, this is a genius idea. This is what we need. And post-COVID, when we're done with this pandemic, there's going to be some people that need some help. And this is the position. If we gear up now, this position will be ready to assist those businesses. No, they're not going to be able to touch every single one, but if we touch 10, we done our job. And I think this is the appropriate time to do it with the CARES Act fund. So I could be supportive of it.
Mayor, I think everyone makes an excellent argument for the establishment of the position. I continue to be opposed because we are using one-time funding. Thank you.
Any other comments? Yeah, my personal feeling is I think that it's a good opportunity to see how this is going to work. I can't think of a better time to try to start building economic development in downtown Glendale. We've tried a couple of things that haven't worked. I think this is critically important. So I'm going to ask for consensus on this. We do have a consensus.
Thank you, Mayor. And with that, if it pleases the mayor and city council, we'll come back after the holidays, say the beginning of February, and give the council a full update on all the projects you've approved through this funding mechanism.
Right, and then on a final note, sir, if you would ask them to check the rest of that fence for gaps and openings and stuff, because there is still a remaining balance on there, if we needed to, we could always bump that up for the rest of that fence if we needed to. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Bauer, would you introduce item 2?
Presentation regarding City Code, Chapter 24, Article 4, specific parking prohibitions.
Mayor, members of the council, the next several items in our workshop will be led by Deputy City Manager Rick St. John.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. I have with me Tim Bowling, the code official, as well, to answer any technical questions that might come up. In the next several presentations, we'll be talking about some code revisions or additions that are either recommendations of the code committee, our staff, or have come from a different area of this council, for example, when we talk about fireworks. So I'll go through, and if we need to pause between the presentations so that the next item can be read for the record, then we'll do that. But at the end of each discussion, I'm seeking council consensus on the recommended changes or additions to the code. So the first is regarding street parking, and this is an item that went through the Code Review Committee. There was some very good discussion about the street parking city code as a whole, and these are the recommended changes that came from the committee. The first change is with City Code 2461, which currently uses the term travel trailer, and we're looking to replace the language travel trailer throughout the code, or that section of the code, with the term recreational vehicle. We believe that it captures more of the intent or spirit of that code to use recreational vehicle. And then in the final section of 2461 in C2, it currently reads that the definition of a travel trailer, as it reads today, will in the future read recreational vehicle, excludes motorhomes, mini motorhomes, recreational vans, tent trailers, boats on a trailer, things of that nature. And we're recommending that that word exclude be changed to include those types of recreational vehicles. The final recommendation from the committee is to add to 2462, which defines currently 15 things that are not allowed or parking violations, add a 16th that states that you're not allowed to park upon any street, alley, roadway for a period in excess of 48 hours. Currently, we do have the ability to tow a vehicle that is left parked on a public roadway, alley, or other public space for more than 48 hours. We do not have an ability to cite for that. So the first action the city can take would be to tow that vehicle. The committee believes that there should be opportunity to cite the vehicle owner before incurring the expense of a tow, and that is the recommendation from the committee. Those are the two recommendations. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
I guess I'm going to point out something that seems awful simple, but it's the kind of stuff that gets crazy. In your 2461 C2, you have a camper trailer or watercraft on a boat trailer or truck camper. So somebody can park their boat trailer out there as long as it doesn't have a watercraft and there's no issues.
Understood. We can, Mayor, members of the council, I understand that, and we can certainly add that even an empty boat trailer would be a violation.
I think if you just simply put watercraft trailer, you don't have to put watercraft on it or not on it. I think that's been more violations I've seen is people just left boat trailers sit out with no boats on them. All right.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions?
So we have consensus for those changes?
Yes.
Go for it.
Thank you. So I'll look to the city clerk. Do we need to read the next item in?
Presentation regarding City Code 29.1 Residential Rental Property Code.
Thank you. This is to establish some language in our code that many other cities in the valley have established, and it is some minimum standards for what air conditioning units and heating units can do as far as performance. In the code today, it just says they have to have a functioning system. And from the way we apply that, if the system is blowing air through the vent, then it is considered functioning. And that leaves some of our residents in either very warm conditions in the summertime or potentially, although not as often, very cold conditions in the wintertime. And so what we're recommending is that we adopt language that's been approved by the Arizona Multi-Housing Association statewide as minimum standard language that basically tells our multifamily housing subdivisions and apartment complexes that they have to not only have a functioning system, but it has to perform at a certain level. And that level, through somewhat of a negotiation with the EMA that was agreed upon, is 70 degrees for heating and 86 degrees for cooling. That does not mean that the system has to be set at 70 or 86 and function at that level while it's in service. As a homeowner, we can choose to set our air conditioning at 88. As a tenant in an apartment complex, you can choose to set your air conditioning at 88 or your heat at 69, for example. These are minimum standards for how the system can perform, and it would be measured by turning the system either up or down depending on whether you're measuring heat or cooling with a measuring device, and once it performs to the level or better, then it's considered to have passed. But if it can't perform at either 70 degrees of heat or 86 degrees of cooling, then it would be considered a non-functioning system. There are other provisions in the code that I've included in the staff report that basically define appropriate heating and cooling systems and the need for such systems to be installed and maintained. It is fairly boilerplate language, and again, this language has been adopted by many other cities within the city or within the valley, and there doesn't seem to be much opposition to it. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, I have a couple questions for you. Air conditioning, if I remember right, works primarily not by necessarily putting cold air into the room. It works actually by taking hot air out. And so you have a typical split from air going in to air coming out, and I think that split typically is about 30 degrees. So my question is, what do you do when you have a 120-degree day and the air conditioner's just going like crazy and it's putting out 90 degrees? Would a code enforcement officer take the call, go to the house, stand there and wait for that thing to get down to that temperature? I'm just trying to figure out, how does that work? How do you do that?
Mayor, members of the council, I'm not an air conditioning expert, so if I say something based on my experience with air conditionings that's not correct, then I apologize, and we'll have to go back and correct the record, and I'll ask Mr. Bowling to chime in here in just a second as well. But evaporative coolers, air conditioning units all operate a little bit differently. But air conditioning units do have refrigerant in them that cools the air. So there is a circulation process where it pulls the warm air out of the home and then circulates it through the system and then blows it back into the home. But it should be blowing back in at a cooler temperature. And what we're saying is that temperature needs to be at a minimum 86 degrees.
Mayor?
Mr. Bowling, anything to add?
Mayor, members of the council, not much to add on that, but there is in this language also how an inspector would measure the temperature. It's from, I believe it says 3 feet off the ground in the middle of the room. And those 120-degree days, they do happen. They're not frequently. So we would be reasonable as far as considering the temperature outside.
Okay, well, my other question was going to be just the opposite of that. Air conditioners also work on a heat pump system. Most of us have heat pumps. We don't have, some people don't have actual heating strips or gas furnace, but the heat pump works just the opposite. It takes the cold air out of the room and replaces it with hot air, so you end up with that split. I can tell you there's many days in the wintertime where my house, it seems like in the morning, doesn't get warm for 2 hours. And so I'm just trying to figure out, if somebody calls up and complains, do you guys go out there and stand there with your thermometer, and are you waiting for it? What would be the practice of doing that? How would you come up with a standard?
Mayor, members of the council, when we do an interior inspection, we make an appointment with the tenant to get into the property. And again, if it's 120 degrees out and if we take that temperature at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we may come back the next day and take the same temperature from the same place at 10 o'clock in the morning, so that we get kind of a range of what's happening. We understand that some of these units only work as good as they can work, and will cool it down as best they can, considering the conditions outside.
You're next, and then you.
Thank you, Mayor. I do know a little bit of something about facilities and HVAC, so I'll just share a little bit. Mayor, you are absolutely right, but slightly off. The split is an indicator of a poor operating unit, between 16 and 20 degrees split, so it's the difference between the return air and the discharge. So the biggest thing on an air conditioning, it's a heat exchanger, so it also dehumidifies the space. So while 86 degrees doesn't seem really cool, if it's being dehumidified, that's pretty decent. However, I think we could do a little better. I don't know that 86 is adequate for a home, because we are protecting those in, let's say, apartments that really need the cooling. I think we all need the cooling, but I would drop that down to maybe 85, 86 a little too high. But Mayor, the inspector would do two things: check that split between 16 and 20, and then check the discharge air. And they can also go outside and check to see if it's dehumidifying with the condensation. So 85 degrees, dehumidified air, the system is working. It's just 110, 120 out. It's really difficult. I hope that helps.
Mayor, yeah, because depending on how hot it is, and sometimes where an air conditioner is located, and different things like that, if especially some of the ones that are on roofs have a really hard time achieving a cooler temperature because of the split of how hot it is up there and trying to cool. So I think I feel like this needs to be a little more clear. Like, at least what kind of a split then, maybe that should be what it is. If it's 122 degrees, you may not be able to achieve, or if you're not gonna put anything in here about the split, then say that the inspector must come back a second time at a different time, a cooler time of the day or something, because sometimes you can't cool a house all the way down to 78 degrees. So, or an apartment, especially in the summer, maybe, upstairs apartments with units on the roof, it can be really difficult to achieve, but you still are cooling it down 30 degrees or more than what the outside temperature is, which is still cooling the room. So, and then I think 70 degrees also is I feel like a little bit high. I don't like heaters anyway. I really hardly ever turn mine on, but because depending on how cold it is, 70 degrees, as the mayor said, might be really hard to achieve also. If it's 30 degrees, that's a 40 degrees temperature difference. So, or, how long is it gonna take to are you gonna give the person to heat the whole house up? Some rooms have, also, one more thing, I see you want to chime in, is that a lot of, depending on if it's a house or an apartment, some rooms are hotter, some rooms are cooler. Where are they going to measure from? The hottest room, the coldest room? I don't know if this is exactly clear enough either. So you're talking about residential anyway.
Mayor, members of the council, first, I'm impressed by people's knowledge of HVAC. I think you're, from my perspective, overthinking this a little bit. Embedded throughout our entire code, we have examples that we could take to the extreme, and yet we don't. We could cite a vehicle for traveling 2 miles an hour over a posted speed limit. Legally, we have the authority to do that. Fire departments legally have the ability to shut down a business for somewhat minor violation, and they don't do it. I mean, I think to try to engineer this to handle all circumstances, I think is the wrong approach. I think this is a general guideline, and always a council body will give direction through their administration about making sure that the way we apply our codes and our rules and our regulations are done in a thoughtful and in a fair and an impartial manner. I don't see a scenario ever where a staff member would be willing to cite a homeowner because it's 120 degrees out and it only is cooling the room down to 95 degrees. So I mean, I think you're all right in terms of how HVAC works. I think this is generally is given to be is a language that's used throughout the valley, and we always use discretion. We always want, whether it be our police department, our building safety inspectors, our engineers, our code enforcement, to use some common sense when applying the code. My question is, I don't know then what the right numbers are. If you try to take it to the kind of to the extreme, we likely can find an example of where once we adopt that policy, where it doesn't work in every circumstance. So my recommendation would be, again, this is pretty broad, broad use on it. We'll always monitor it, and I think, as we all know, anytime we enforce something, if people feel it's unfair, generally that will make its way back to either the council or city hall, and that certainly would not be our goal here. So, I just would caution about getting too technical on this. I think it's designed to eliminate non-functioning units, to make sure that it's not just saying, hey, it's blowing out air so it meets the code.
Mr. Phelps, and I understand that, but I did do a few years in air conditioning, and I know one of the problems that a lot of people don't think about, for those of us that grew up with swamp coolers, if you didn't have proper ventilation for swamp cooler, that room would get miserable. I mean, it had to have air constantly blowing all the time, or you just couldn't do it. Same thing with air conditioning. You can have a system that works perfect, but if it's not balanced properly, or if there's restriction in your ductwork, or if the ductwork insulation falls off, that particular room, if it's a west-facing room, could get extremely hot, where the rest of the house you could be freezing to death. So what I'm worried about is that one renter that calls up and constantly complains over and over and over because they think it should be hotter, or they think it should be colder, and yet the owner of the home can't do anything about it, just from either the way that the system was put in years ago, maybe it's the ductwork's, got slight leaks in it. It could get pretty expensive for the homeowners, and that's my concern, that we don't create a situation where somebody that just simply thinks, well, if I got a new air conditioner, my electric bill is going to go down $50 a month, so I want a new air conditioner. If I complain enough, the city will make it happen.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think you asked the question just a little while ago, is how is it measured? How are you going to measure the temperature? I mean, are you going to just do they look at the thermostat? I don't know what they do. And if you get a call from a renter who says, my air conditioning's not working, and you go out there, do you look at the thermostat in the house? The AC guys have those things that they I don't know what they're called, but I know what they look like, to measure the air temperature, and that's how they determine what the split is. But if a code inspector goes out on a call like this, because I can say in my own home, I've got a south-facing room with 3 exposed walls. That room gets hot. It's the hottest room in the house, always the hottest room in the house. And we've done everything we can do in there. But I mean, there are lots of houses have. So that room might be hot, and the rest of the house is 78 degrees. So especially on days when it's really, really warm, that room just doesn't cool off. I'm just curious how are they determining the temperature of the residents?
Mayor, Councilmember Tom Chaff, if I can make a couple of comments first, and then I have Tim Bowling walk through how they measure the temperature of the room. The complaints that we receive about cooling come from our larger apartment complexes, multifamily housing. We don't get complaints about rentals, houses. So houses that are for rent, tenants and landlords seem to be working pretty well together to keep the properties maintained. Where we get complaints on a yearly basis during the summer months is with a couple of our larger multifamily housing complexes, where management has not made the investments, have systems that were installed in the 50s, maybe 60s, and they haven't made the necessary investments and improvements so that they continue to function. So when we get these complaints, we go out now, and if the system is blowing any air at all, it's considered as a pass. What we're saying in what other cities in the valley have said and what other cities across the nation have said as far as the heating, where heat becomes more of an issue than cooling in some other parts of the country, 70 degrees is the national standard that's been set. And for those areas of our country where cooling is more important, 86 degrees seems to be the standard. That's why we've included the language at those temperatures. It is to address those larger complexes that aren't making the appropriate investments and keeping their properties in a condition that we would deem livable. And so we do have an ordinance today that allows us to go out and measure temperatures and check systems. It's not sufficient. And so we're recommending the addition of these levels of performance. And I should point out that 86 degrees is for evaporative cooling systems. And for air conditioning units, it's actually 82 degrees in the code. And that's my mistake for not including that in the slide. I apologize for that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bowling, and he can discuss how they will actually measure the temperature.
But before you do that, so what you just said is primarily multi-housing. You said virtually almost every complaint is multi-housing. Would you have any problem with this being residential, multi-housing rental property and leave out the regular homes? I could support that.
Mayor, members of the council, if that's the council's decision, yes.
All right, Mayor, members of the council, in the first section, 1A, it indicates that the distance, the temperature will be measured at a distance 3 feet above floor level in the center of the room. And we'll have a thermometer, and that's how we measure the temperature.
Of the room, so like, would you measure multiple rooms or just one room, or
Mayor, members of the council, we would take the temperature in multiple rooms. Typically, the person that complained would be complaining about a specific room or area, and we would measure whichever area they felt didn't meet the standards.
so maybe it should say every room rather than the room or a room?
Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Well, the proposed language does say all habitable rooms, bathrooms, and flushing toilet rooms. So, that wouldn't include a storage closet or something like that. It's just the habitable spaces. So I have at least two questions. These temperatures, 70 degrees, 82 degrees, and 86 degrees, where do those numbers come from? Are they widely in use through our region? Is that generally accepted standard here? And then the other question I have is, generally in a year, more or less, how many of these kind of calls do we respond to?
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, members of the council, we get, I would guess, 8 to 10 calls each summer for usually multifamily properties that are not providing adequate air conditioning. And in those situations, it's usually the system has gone down and has broken. In some situations, the cooling component of it is just not working well. So if it turns on and is blowing air, our current code just says it has to be operating. And if it's blowing air, it's operating. So having some temperatures to measure gives us, it's kind of like having grass over 6 inches high. You have a measurement that's easy to do. This gives us a measurement. 70 degrees is the national standard for heating. That exists in our current code for heating. And for heating, it hasn't been a problem. Many codes are adopted from the East Coast. East Coast is older. That's where a lot of codes originated from. So the East Coast had a 70-degree temperature for heating for many, many years. And that's pretty much across the country. Typically, it's more important to heat a living unit than it is to cool it down, especially on the East Coast. So those codes have existed for a long time. 70 degrees has been the national standard for many, many years. The West Coast, it's just as important to provide cooling, but the West Coast has been a little bit slower in adopting codes that required a level of cooling that made sense. A few years ago, this code was adopted and as Rick mentioned, was kind of approved by the Arizona Multi-Housing Association and their members as far as coming to a temperature that makes sense. And what made sense was 82 degrees for air conditioning and 86 for evaporative cooling.
Mayor, if I understand correctly, we don't have all that many cases. The cases we do have come generally from multi-housing facilities, and the Multi-Housing Association agrees with these numbers that you're proposing. And I see the heads are nodding yes, and therefore I think I would be able to concur with the recommendation. Thank you.
With whose recommendation?
Staff recommendation here.
And again, my question was if this was residential multi-housing rental property, we already have their blessing already. My concern is on the homes. Some of the older homes, people have window air conditioners, and that room might be 72 degrees, and the room next to it that maybe they don't use might be 95. If it's a rental house, I mean, I guess my concern is, and you say that you don't get those complaints. If you don't get the complaints, then we're fixing a problem we don't even need to worry about. It's the multi-housing, it seems like, is really the biggest concern. When a unit goes down, multiple people are out all at the same time, and that is a concern. That's the stuff we don't want to see on TV. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
why would you narrow your options? Even though we've heard from staff that the complaints are primarily multifamily housing, why would you remove the ability of a code inspector to cite for that occasional housing rental? I would say just leave it alone. I mean, if all the complaints are for multifamily to begin with, it never becomes an issue, but I hate to reduce options. And so I think leaving it residential rental is a better option than narrowing it down to just multifamily. Thank you.
Question regarding this in relationship to the state law under the Tenant Landlord Act. I mean, there are provisions there that the landlords have certain responsibilities to take care of maintaining heat and cooling in order to make them livable, their standards. How does this compare to what those standards are in the tenant landlord? And would they not override anything we write into this code anyway?
No, Mayor, Vice Mayor, the Arizona Landlord Tenant Act basically says that you have to provide heating and cooling. It doesn't give specific standards, but cities have the authority to enact an ordinance that does develop standards that must be met.
Thank you.
Else?
Mayor, yeah, we're not, so these two conversations, and I agree with Joyce, Councilmember Clark on this one, we are not excluding rental homes, correct? I wouldn't want to bifurcate it where is, okay, then we're good.
Any other conversation? Consensus on this?
Presentation regarding guidelines to establish a foreclosure program.
Mayor, members of the council, this was an item of interest by Vice Mayor Malnar to look at a foreclosure program. There is one other city in the valley that has a foreclosure program. That is the city of Phoenix. No other cities have a foreclosure program. ARS 9499 establishes our authority to abate violations on private property, and Glendale City Code gives staff authority to abate in accordance with that revised statute. The cost of foreclosure is roughly $5,000 through the legal system. There's a full process that the property goes through. The city would, in theory, never actually take possession of a property. That property would be auctioned on the county courthouse steps prior to the city actually taking any possession. What we would like to talk with council about today are what criterion we would look at for engaging in a foreclosure process. Now, the city of Phoenix has several different criteria that they look at, some of which are applicable to our city, many of which are not, because we're not faced with the same issues that the city of Phoenix is faced with as a smaller community. But we do need to establish, if we choose to move forward with a foreclosure program, when the city would pursue foreclosure. I've been doing enforcement in the city for about 24 years now. This, as a tool in the toolbox, we've talked about on a handful of occasions with very few houses. So we are not talking about, I want to make it very clear for the council, that we are not talking about going out and taking people's property. What we're talking about is abating very bad nuisance and blight issues in our communities when responsible parties are not available to do so. So we deal with properties where the homeowner has died, and that family living out of state isn't taking responsibility for the property or the land the property is on, and the city is continually going out to do abatement of weeds and overgrown grass, or even at times demolition of buildings that have been deemed unsafe or that have caught fire. And those are very few and far between, but this is a helpful tool in the toolbox to address some of those concerns as they come up. I've listed some possible criteria that we might need to consider. One of the things that Phoenix looks at, for example, is that the amount of money owed because of prior liens exceeds the cost of doing foreclosure, which, again, as I stated, is about $5,000. The liens that we have in the city of Glendale very rarely, if ever, exceed $5,000. So we don't believe that that would be an important, or that would be a criteria that we'd want to place in this ordinance. But we do need to look at what the cost to the city is for allowing the property to continue as it is. And so we would want to look at things like public safety calls for service, the number of resources that we're investing, and how often we're investing those resources to abate issues on that property. We'd look at code enforcement, the number of calls that they, how often they get called out, how much money they're spending out of their general fund monies to abate and put liens on the property that aren't being addressed, what the existing liens on the property are, in a combined dollar amount that would exceed and make it obvious that it's of financial benefit to the city to go ahead and foreclose on the property and stop what has been occurring over usually a number of years by this point. We would not suggest going after owner-occupied properties. We would go after properties that are either abandoned or vacant, and ownership is unresponsive. With that, I'll open the floor for any other discussion or criteria the council would like to discuss.
Mayor.
Good.
Mr. St. John, does this apply to commercial properties as well? Or are we just talking about residential property?
Mayor, members of the council, to this point, we've only discussed residential, not commercial.
I think the bigger issue, I mean, in terms of foreclosure, I can't think of anything in 20 years that required foreclosure in terms of a residential property in my district. And I dare say that's probably reflective of the other council members as well. But in terms of commercial, oh yeah, I've seen a couple of properties that have been vacant for 20 years and are minimally, if at all, maintained. This foreclosure program would have more meaning for me if it applied to commercial properties rather than residential. I don't really see the need in terms of residential. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor? This was brought forward as an item of special interest by me as the chairman of the Code Committee. The Code Committee discussed this at length and recommended unanimously that we adopt a ordinance within the city of Glendale to allow foreclosure because of the issues that have been mentioned by Mr. St. John regarding residential. We did not ever discuss commercial, though I don't see a problem if we wanted to add that as a council. But what I'd like to hear briefly is the information we received as a committee, what impact this program had on the city of Phoenix. And it isn't, from what I understood, it wasn't that there were mass foreclosures at all. In fact, just the opposite. But there was a dramatic impact when the threat of foreclosure was available to the city, and what impacts that had on those owners of property who failed to take care of the property, who immediately stood up and started to take care of the property.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, when the city of Phoenix adopted the language several years ago, they had issues where people were coming in and paying the property tax on properties that had significant liens that were placed by the city. In paying for the property tax over a given number of years, they then took possession of that property and weren't paying the liens back, which caused the city of Phoenix to look at the number of houses they had, or rental properties, or I suppose even commercial could apply.
To file foreclosure, so you want to look at properties where you're not overspending the amount of money to not recover. Basically, the program is kind of a win-win because it addresses properties where there's no solution. There's no family, there's no property owner that's taking responsibility for cleaning it. Usually the properties that are in that situation, the code compliance is out there frequently trying to get people to comply and bring it into compliance, but to no avail. It also includes public safety, getting calls for service. That tends to be properties where homeless will hang out, and in the wintertime they'll start fires inside structures, and sometimes those fires get out of control. The fire department comes out. A lot of times you have squatters in those types of properties, and the police department gets continuously called out. So it creates a situation where there's a lot of tax dollars are being used for staff to address a problem property. We do have some residential properties in the Saguaro district that we've come across where there's no owner taking responsibility, and it's going on 4 or 5 years now. The way to resolve that is to foreclose on the property, not with the intent of the city of Glendale taking possession of the property, but we only ask for the opening bid at Maricopa County to be a dollar amount that will pay us back for the amount of liens that we've put on the property. What that does is it also transfers the property into ownership that will in turn do something with the property that will resolve the issue for the neighborhood. Typically, the people that, as I talked to the deputy director in Phoenix, and I asked if they had ever actually acquired a property that they foreclosed on, and the answer was no. Out of about 100 that they've foreclosed on, they haven't acquired a single property because a developer or an investor will show up at the county court steps and outbid them. And when they outbid them, they get a property that's probably worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000 or $90,000. They get it for about $15,000 to $20,000. So they can invest, fix it up, and then resell it, and it's a win-win. They make money out of it. The neighborhood is better because now the property is improved and something's moving forward with it, and the city gets their money back.
Mayor, if I may. And again, that is, I think, a very astute way of saying why we felt like from the committee that we needed to have this ordinance in the city. And so this is a recommendation from the Code Committee to move forward and to allow this tool in the toolbox. And to understand, very frankly, in the city of Glendale, it won't be used very often. But it can be used, and my district in particular has had several occasions where it could have been used and it would have been made things much better. And so I think in the future it'll be just a tool that can be used, and so I urge that we provide consensus to move this forward. I don't have any objections if we want to further study the commercial aspect of this, but the residential is really coming from the Code Committee, and I would urge that we provide consensus. Thank you.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, if I could, this program it's basically attached to properties that we've cleaned and leaned. So we do clean and lean several commercial properties, so you could definitely foreclose on a commercial property as this is written.
Mayor. Thank you. As a member of the Code Committee, along with Councilmember Malnar, or Vice Mayor Malnar and Councilmember Clark, and 7 residents, this was something that was discussed, and there wasn't objection to it. They see this as the Vice Mayor said, an important tool in the toolbox. It means to people we mean business about this. It won't be one we have to use often, but you know, just like that biggest wrench you might have in your toolbox, when you need it, you need it. And I see this as being that. The $5,000 approximate average expense that it costs us to go through the foreclosure process, is that amount, or whatever the exact amount would be for a given foreclosure, is that recoverable to the city as well? In essence, like attorney's fees, but whatever expenses we incur, can that be added to the lien amount and we recover on that?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Turner, in discussions with Mr. Bailey, I'm told that we cannot recover that funding.
So the point being, we're not doing this for financial gain or even to so much to cover expenses. We're doing it to preserve the quality of life in our neighborhoods. And I think that's well worth, I think that's why we're here. Thank you.
Just a final question. Approximately how many properties do we have right now that if this was enforced, that you guys would start the process tomorrow?
Mayor, members of the council, we cleaned and leaned 77 properties last year. That means those are the ones that we placed a lien on the property. Of those, if your question is how many would we foreclose on, as I mentioned, there's a few that we're aware of in the Saguaro District, 3 maybe, and those are ones that the police department have had excessive calls for service, and I think that's where the foreclosure tool could be effective. The other 74, I don't think that the foreclosure tool is something that we would look at. Over the last year, about half of our liens have been repaid back, and the liens do cloud the title on a property, so anytime there's a title search or a mortgage on a property, it pops up, and our liens get paid off pretty regularly, a pretty good rate, I think. I think this foreclosure is just for a select few properties that, again, public safety is having excessive problems with, and code compliance continues to goes out and clean and lean the property, but there's no resolution in sight.
So your answer was 3? And it's just in Saguaro District only?
Mayor, members of the council, those are the 3 that I'm aware of. There may be others throughout the city that this may be a good tool for, but there are 3 that I'm aware of right now.
All right, good.
He raised another question. So if a property is being foreclosed on for back property taxes, if it gets foreclosed for that, our lien gets wiped away and we don't recover, is that correct?
Mayor, Councilman Turner, that's correct.
Okay, so this would give us an opportunity to be proactive on a property that was at risk for that and get our foreclosure filed first, and therefore we would be able to recover at least the costs of what we've done to clean the property. And many of these properties, by the time they get to this situation, we've cleaned on them several times. So it's not just a one-time situation. We've been back time and time again for weeds and other blight issues. So,
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, that's correct. We could look at some of the properties where the CP buyers have purchased the taxes for 3 years, and if we have a lien that we want to protect on there, then yeah, it would make sense for us to foreclose. And again, that was one of the main priorities for the program developed in the city of Phoenix. And after just 2 years of implementation of that program, it saved $1.3 million of preventing tax foreclosures.
Just one other comment I'd like to make. It's been referenced several times that this $5,000 cost to foreclose could easily be recouped just in the savings in our public safety. If we have a property that is constantly where our public safety is being called out, that we don't put a cost to that and allocate it back to this property, but it is a real cost that will be saved. And so I think we need to recognize that there'll be savings in many other areas, whether it's code compliance and or public safety, that we'll recognize savings if this process is used. Thank you.
You looking for consensus?
Mayor, yes, sir.
Just one clarification, are we going to include commercial?
Said it already includes it.
Oh, okay, very good, thank you.
Council item of special interest, firework regulations.
Mayor, members of the council, this is in continuation of a conversation that was started on June 23rd in workshop. In that workshop, council established set fine amounts for violations of our fireworks ordinance in the amounts of $1,500 for a first offense and $2,000 for any subsequent offense occurring in the same 12-month period. In that conversation, council did ask for additional information. I've listed those things on the slide, requesting to make it illegal to possess non-permissible fireworks. And again, non-permissible fireworks are those that launch into the air and typically make very loud and obstructive noises. Establish a time of day where permissible fireworks cannot be used, and require vendors to post signs listing the set fine amounts established by council on June 23rd. Our city code 2670.3, which deals with fireworks, already makes it illegal to possess, display fireworks as defined by state law. In the discussion on June 23rd, I was not aware of that language, and in doing the research after the council discussion, it clearly states that it's illegal to possess, display fireworks. We've not been enforcing the possession of fireworks. We've been enforcing the sale and or use of these display fireworks, but we certainly can, with council direction, start enforcing the possession aspect of the code. The 2670.5 requires the posting of signs by vendors. We are recommending to add language that states that violations of the Glendale City Code regulating fireworks may result in a mandatory fine of $1,500 for a first offense and $2,000 for any subsequent offense as being posted by vendors as part of their signage. And then finally, addressing the time of day that permissible fireworks are not allowed to be used. In discussion with the city attorney's office and the amount of regulation the state has given to fireworks, and some desire for the state to walk back some of that regulation, we feel that it's better to place this component in our noise ordinance. So add a 13th component to the noise from permissible fireworks and their use as defined in section 70.3, except between the hours of 12:30 a.m. and 7 a.m. And as you know, the noise ordinance typically protects the time period of 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. So this gives a little more leniency of when permissible fireworks can be used. And as a reminder, non-permissible or display fireworks, regardless of time of day, cannot be used. Those are the recommendations as suggested by council on June 23rd. And so today we're submitting language to meet those recommendations and asking for consensus to move that forward.
One question I have for you, is there anything in statute that requires that posting to also be in Spanish other than just English only?
Mayor, members of the council, I do not believe so. I did read the entirety of the state law, do not recall seeing that provision.
I'd like to see that posting also in Spanish.
Mayor, yes, sir.
Councilmember Tomchow?
Thank you, Mayor. I had a question about the posting as well, because it says requires the posting of signs by vendors, but I feel like it's unlikely that people who are using illegal fireworks are gonna go to the fireworks stands that sell, you know, the stuff you sit on the ground. So where else would this be posted?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tommelchaff, the state law provides some restrictions on what you can regulate. The restrictions do state that cities can regulate that vendors of permissible fireworks must display certain signage, and so the recommendations today do meet those state requirements. I'm not sure where else we would post other than using our signage board, social media, to get the word out to our public that what we're talking about is permissible fireworks, those fireworks as defined by the statute that basically stay on the ground and sparkle, that this does not apply to display or non-permissible fireworks, which are always illegal.
Okay, Mayor, if I could follow up, and that's kind of what I was getting at. I would like to see a pretty aggressive social media campaign in the run-up to New Year's and in the run-up to 4th of July to make sure people are aware that we're going to be enforcing this and that there's a $1,500 fine. Because I'm just saying the people who have the illegal fireworks, that they bring them in from out of state or however they get them, aren't going to see these signs. So I would think that we would want to make sure we get it out as much as we can, running up to New Year's, you know, maybe right before or after Christmas. And because people share that kind of stuff too, and it multiplies and it's a good way to get the message out. But I just feel like just posting it at the fireworks stands is not going to do a whole lot to keep things, you know. The whole idea is it upsets residents, it upsets their pets, it's noisy, it's late. So it's important that we get the message out there too, because that's what we're trying to stop, is the late night and the, you know, sounds like battlefield going on well into the night. So I think it's important that we make sure, even though whatever the statutes restrict us via social media and other ways, that we make a real effort to get the word out to people. Hopefully the $1,500 fine is a deterrent for people actually to doing what they've been doing.
I agree with everything you said, although keep in mind, it's not just fireworks stands. Almost every grocery store also has fireworks display, in Walmarts, and so that posting, I think, and that's why I think it's important that it's in both Spanish and English. Give people an opportunity to do the right thing.
Thank you, Mayor. You mentioned grocery stores, so to our staff. So are we, if we find somebody that's not in compliance, are we finding just the vendor that's in the parking lot, or let's say the hardware store or grocery store that's allowed them to use it, so the property owner? Is it one or both?
Mayor, Councilmember Aldama, typically we're citing the person in violation only, not the owner of the property that's allowed that tenant to be on that property.
Thank you, sir. And so what onus do they have to make sure that they're assuring that who they're leasing to is being responsible?
Mayor, Councilmember Aldama, I would have to do some research into that.
I think that they too should have some responsibility. If I'm the hardware store who has a large property and I'm allowing 10 others to be out there selling, they're not doing the right thing and we're not even watching it. I don't get fined, therefore nothing, there's no reason for me to make sure those that I'm leasing to are doing the right thing. Can you look into that?
Mayor, Councilmember Aldama, yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
On that point?
Yeah, it was. Thank you, Mayor. So I'm a little confused. Do we have a problem with fireworks vendors selling illegal fireworks? It's my understanding that people get those by other means than the fireworks stands that set up around town. So is that an issue?
Mayor, members of the council, we did have one issue this past summer prior to 4th of July where a vendor had set up in a warehouse in South Central Glendale, I'll say. That case was investigated. A large amount of display fireworks were seized, and a case was submitted to the city court. But typically, you're correct, we don't find a lot of non-permissible or display fireworks for sale during our inspections of those that are legally selling permissible fireworks during the appropriate times of the year from vacant lots or parking lots of other business owners.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm glad to see that even under our noise ordinance, we will include some kind of time frame when non-display fireworks are permissible. I think a lot of frustration with the general public is that we will call to report fireworks even when we give a location. And patrol, there's never enough patrol. So patrol may not get out there for a half an hour, hour and a half. By then, the fireworks are over. Has PD ever considered on 4th of July and New Year's at least, assigning specific rovers or patrol that do nothing but maybe one per district, which is not enough, but at least it's a start, that answers nothing but fireworks calls, complaints, so that we might actually catch somebody who is shooting off fireworks, because there's nothing like a couple of people being actually caught and cited to help curb and stem the use of illegal fireworks. And right now, the general consensus is you can do it and nobody's ever going to show up in time and you're going to get away with it. So has PD ever considered dedicating maybe 6 officers to roam the city and just answer fireworks complaints?
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, this past 4th of July, Chief Briggs and I had some conversation prior to the holiday, and we did have officers on the street that were specific to fireworks enforcement. I don't have the numbers of their productivity in front of me. I do recall receiving some information from the chief after the holiday. They weren't big numbers, but they were out there specifically to enforce the fireworks ordinance language as it stood then.
I think if people know that there will be officers dedicated specifically to answering fireworks complaints, they're more likely to make that call. I would like to see whatever numbers were generated from this first-time project last July 4th. And in addition to social media should be driven to talk not only about prohibition against display fireworks and the time frame, but also let people know that we are dedicating officers who will answer those calls. I think if we include all 3 components, that may very well help the situation. Thank you, sir.
Is there consensus to move forward with this language with the addition of including a Spanish version of the signage?
What's next?
Discussion of the city code regarding vehicle parking.
Mayor and council, this is a discussion regarding kind of a general concept of vehicle parking, fairly behemoth in nature, and as they say, when you eat an elephant is one bite at a time, and so I've invited others to try and help me eat it. In the context of Mr. St. John and Mr. Bowling, you'll go ahead and I apologize for the awkwardness. We're on both sides, so I don't have the clicker, and for whatever reason, this keeps breaking out. To give you some background with regards to the parking issues that we're faced with, they arose out of the context of parking in front yards, and uniquely enough, in our code, parking in the front yard of a residential district is actually, is prohibited, except in accordance with your zoning ordinance. And so what happened over time is that owners of property in areas would get zoning relief for parking regulations. And when I'm talking about parking regulation, I'm even talking about Chapter 24. So, and this precedes, I think, everybody here. So it's of no fault of anybody either. Circumstances arise and solutions are created, but we are left with what we have. Administrative relief was provided, which made it difficult to enforce because we now have a parking restriction where we've said that with regards to parking in a front yard, with regards to a dust-free surface, what is appropriate, and it became difficult to enforce based upon that interpretation. Noting also, when we reference parking within a front yard except in accordance with the zoning ordinance, noting that most of the development in the city of Glendale is not straight zone. So it's usually not even within our regulations and guidelines in our code, it's usually within a PAD or some other type of zoning instrument. So keeping that in mind as we kind of get through the background. So a code committee was formed. The code committee, this was the initial question that they addressed. From that point in time, there was recommendations that have come out, and those have been tendered to me and Mr. St. John and Mr. Bowling. And I've provided those to you. Those were provided as the draft residential parking standards, which was proposed at the time to be in the Uniform Development Code. And we're here today to seek direction. Noting that, I want to go through quickly just the background, because what happened during this time was somewhat unique and our concerns were allayed. Primary concern when you're speaking about zoning is you're speaking about private property rights, and the fact that with Prop 207, and this is the old Prop 207, spoke to the fact that existing rights to divide, use, possess your property in the event that they were regulated, that that was a compensable taking if that was taken away from somebody. Noting that there were exceptions for health, safety, and transportation, but uniquely enough in our code, we referenced always back to zoning. So there was that conflict that existed. Also noting the fact that when we made changes with regards to the opinion, that one would argue that they had a right under the existing code at the time, and therefore they had a grandfathered use. So to the extent that we would need to change any use, it would be grandfathered and we would have to recognize it. And that's good law. Uniquely enough, in 2020, in the town of Fountain Hills, there was a case, and I've provided the opinion to the council that spoke to the fact that there is no inherent or vested right in the continuation of a particular manner of parking automobiles on property. And so in terms of parking restrictions, those do not purport to regulate land uses, which is a little unique in that regard. Generally, we're just simply defining the locations where vehicles may be placed on a property. So noting this, taking what's been provided by the Code Committee, we are in a situation where we need to reconcile some of the recommendations from the Code Committee and recognizing, and my recommendation being that this is the opportunity with these recommendations, that some of these recommendations need to be shifted from the Uniform Development Code into the traffic and parking sections of the code, which are then directly related to code enforcement.
Mayor? Thank you, Mayor. Clarifying question. Back to the grandfathering. Well, can you explain why that's important? The Fountain Hills case, and why is it important to Glen? Why are you mentioning it? Because I'm looking through your slide and nothing's in there. Can you just go back to that?
Yeah. Yes.
How it
Mayor,
relates to us here.
yeah, Councilmember Aldama. The issue that arises is that, at least the question that we had, the concern that we had from a staff perspective is that, again, our code references the fact that you cannot park on a front lawn except in accordance with the zoning ordinance. So now we're talking about a zoning right. So when you talk about a zoning right, courts will look at private property rights because that's how you use the property. And when you're talking about zoning, and it's 462, they speak to the fact that if you are at some point in time in conformance with the zoning code, which the administrative interpretation provided, that if the city takes that away from you, so if you were saying parking in your front yard and the city takes that away from you, that we're taking away what would be a grandfathered use, which may be, again, a compensable taking, what we would need to pay to eliminate that. that's the state of the law, but then with Novak, in Novak, the situation was there was an individual that parked in a certain manner. And the town of Fountain Hills changed the manner in which they regulated their parking. From a certain number of cars, it went from a larger number of cars to a smaller number of cars, and it was contained in their transportation and their traffic code. And the homeowner complained, saying, well, no, I have a vested right in how I park my cars at my house. And the court said, no, you don't. That's not what the traffic code is dictating. It's the manner in which you park. Kind of like one regulation we have in our traffic, it's you park parallel in your driveway generally. You don't park perpendicular in a driveway. You go into the garage. You don't go sideways into a garage. And so what the court said is that there's no vested right in parking in a particular manner. So noting that, one of the things that the code committee went through was they looked at elements of how can we more regulate parking, and they proposed it in the development code, which would be zoning, and I'm asking that we take that out. And that's why I have these gentlemen here, is because I'm gifting them the opportunity to work with these elements of the code.
Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Mayor, thank you for that broad explanation. So for many years, our staff was enforcing code, but allowing grandfather rights to a few who felt that they were grandfathered, therefore they can park in a certain area in the front yard. So are you saying that two things? One, that was incorrect, and two, we shouldn't be doing that anymore going forward? Is that what I'm hearing?
Mayor and council, I'm not saying something is incorrect, but what I am saying is, moving forward, I believe we can make changes to our traffic and parking code that don't implicate private property rights under the context of Prop 207 and do not implicate grandfathered use rights.
Like an attorney, huh?
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Based upon your last statement, Mr. Bailey, could you give me an example of how that would be applied? Just pick out anything that you're familiar with.
One simple element of the parking code that the council could consider. Now, and understand, I'm working to review work product that's been provided to me by the committee. So I'm reviewing that, and that's one reason I want to come to and get some clarifications for you. But this is by no means the end work product in my from my position, and I have to speak to my client, which is the code enforcement group. But it may be unique and beneficial for the city to reconsider what Chapter 24, which deals with the sale, storage, and repair of vehicles, speaks to within any residentially zoned district, no person shall park or permit to be parked any vehicle within a front yard area except in accordance with the zoning ordinance of the City Code of Glendale. If you focused on that, you may be able to amend that and address the issue that's the genesis of why we are here. It's not going to address other elements that have been proposed by the Code Committee, though. But that right there could address the front yard parking element, noting that when we do make a change, it's not going to change purely existing zoning on driveway locations, non-permeable surfaces or non-dust-proof surfaces. That's truly zoning. That's what a residential neighborhood looks like. But where you park, that needs to get out of, and when I mean where you park, where you physically park, that's what we would address here.
Okay, so theoretically, hypothetically, it could then be applied to, for instance, I know of just one case, one example in my district where they have virtually concreted the entire front yard, everything. And they typically park right in front of the front door. which I would consider a safety hazard, if nothing else. Would an issue such as that be able to be addressed by going in through this back door rather than any other way?
Mayor and council member, we're by no means going in a back door. What we're talking about here, and you have identified, and I'll try and bifurcate this as I go through. Your first issue that I think you've identified is the fact that our code, the zoning code, requires the fact that you must have 40% it's a coverage issue, a lot coverage issue. And I'm not really going to, I'm probably not prepared to speak to that, but to the extent that
Yeah,
you
I
are
understand.
on an area that's not part of that 40%, you are now parking in an area that's not allowable parking. So to the extent that you're parking in that, parking becomes an issue. So you may have concreted in your entire front yard. That's a different issue. But to the extent that you're parking in an area that does not meet how we define our parking, then yes, that would be the citable issue. But noting that, again, as it is the case with every single instance, we'd have to look at the particulars of it. But that's the issue that I think got us to where we were at. And so that's what we're trying to eliminate.
Okay, I
On that
understand.
issue.
I understand, and I think I asked so that the public would get a better sense of where we're heading. But I think you are proposing a route that may solve some of the more egregious issues and complaints that we have gotten for years. Would that be a fair statement?
Mayor and Councilmember, that's a very accurate statement, with the caveat that there will be some cases, and the intent is that that will be the exception to the rule. And when I mean an exception, it's an exception to the rule, where based on whatever circumstances that may have arisen, whether it be the issuance of a permit or something in that regard with regards to construction or a remodel, that I think that there's a different legal analysis that would need to occur. But the intent, yes, is to get to the destination that you're speaking to.
Thank you very much.
Continuing, if I may, and so I think I've addressed the issue that was before the Code Committee. In terms of the work product that was before me, I was asked to review other things that have been identified by the Code Review Committee, and I bring these to the council's attention because it would be helpful to get some direction on them. So I hope we're in a very participating mood, and please give me your feedback. But
Mayor?
one element of the change which was unique was one of the genesis of this was the fact that we provided administrative relief. And what has been proposed in the new changes are 4 different opportunities for administrative relief. And to walk you through those, and then I'll get some direction from you. The first is with regards to lot coverage and irregular shaped lots. That's fairly traditionally in a zoning code. That does not impact parking, though. The next is additional exceptions with regards to unique conditions, to the extent that there was a remodel or something in that regard, to the extent that somebody may have done a garage conversion. And now the garage is a residential component, and the driveway extends from that. And traditionally, that has been something that has been allowed with permitted conversions. What went expansive, I think, with regards to the proposals was that the recommendations from the commission got to be very focused on and prescriptive in terms of elements with regard to parking. And one of them would be an unloading, a loading repair requirement where it speaks to the fact that loading and unloading, and again, I bring this to your attention because unloading and loading has nothing to do with zoning. It has to do with parking. And so now I'm kind of going back to where I started, is that we need to shoot this into parking, and keeping in mind that even with parking, where you place it, not only is code enforcement allowed to cite for it, but so is the police department. So noting this, with regards to, I'm trying to pull the exact section, so bear with me. There was a proposal for relief with regards to loading and unloading or repairs of no more than 72 hours within 7 consecutive days. And we'll talk about that standard a little bit, but then the commission authorizes the zoning administrator to authorize a longer period of time if an emergency exists, up to a maximum of 5 days, but there's no delineation of what is an emergency. We're going to go back through these. I'm just kind of creating this. I've already told Kevin we'll be here all night. And then finally, there is a section that speaks to, which currently is not allowed on our code, the temporary occupancy of travel trailers and sorts, that now they will be allowed if the zoning administrator grants a temporary occupancy permit, which one does not actually exist in the city of Glendale. So I've presented to you 4 different, and I think I've captured those correctly. 4 different questions I have of the council, and the first is there a general consensus to maintain the administrative relief, and it would be my recommendation that you would, with regards to irregularly shaped lots for lot coverage, and that would be somewhere in a cul-de-sac or a corner where, due to the situation of the property, there would need to be relief given.
Mayor? As we're talking about these reliefs, could you again explain to the council who this relief would be granted by?
The relief for all of the 4 scenarios I put up there, the relief would be granted by the zoning administrator. And in some instances, and the reason why I ask, and again, I'm not sold either way. I'm here to try and help you work through this. Again, this is an elephant. We're trying to eat here one bite at a time. In some instances, we don't currently have permits or procedures to grant this type of relief.
Mayor, if I may ask some additional questions or comments. When the Code Committee reviewed these items, there wasn't full 100% agreement on providing relief in some areas. Though overall, I think the consensus was that there needed to be some sort of relief. And especially because there are so many exceptions to the rule. There's always going to be something come up that we cannot possibly address all the items in any kind of code. And also I wanted to address very briefly, when the Code Committee made these recommendations, we were under the understanding that it was going to be within the
UDC, the Development Code.
Yes, the Development Code. However, subsequent to that, as we've had discussions, the committee is now very much aware and has been informed, and we've had discussions about how we needed to pull out, it was our recommendation that we do some sort of pulling out from that code and put it into its own kind of area, such as traffic or parking or whatever we create. So the committee does agree with that recommendation to do that, I believe, and then have possibly some administrative relief, because we cannot possibly address every scenario that exists in the city. There's always going to be an exception. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor? Thank you, Mayor. So this consensus for this number 1, the irregularly shaped lots, would be that the relief would be done administratively? I'm just curious why it wouldn't go to the Board of Adjustment for something like this.
Mayor and Council, that what generally exists in our code is there's an ability for design standards for the zoning administrator to provide some relief. To the extent this is captured in that, yes, the zoning administrator, you would apply to the zoning administrator. The zoning administrator would actually provide that relief.
But there'd be no public process then if it's administrative. So I guess I'm trying to understand. So right now you could try to get relief for something like this, and you could take it to the Board of Adjustment, and this would become administrative, is that right?
Mayor and Council, the challenge that we're faced with here is you have circumstances where people are acquiring property, and I'm going to give you a hypothetical here, and if I don't get it right, cut me off, gentlemen. You have individuals that acquire, well, and let me take a step back. We do not straight zone anything anymore. So this generally does not apply to any new construction. This generally will apply to existing construction unless it's a very small one-off or two-off developments. I spoke with Ms. Collins. She told me that in terms of development since she's been here, and my recollection since I've been here, we have never straight zoned anything. So this is generally with existing development that exists. Somebody purchases a parcel of property, they're on a corner or they're somewhere strangely situated in that they want to expand or do something to the property, that they would need relief with regards to how they park in the permeable surface or the dust-free, it's the dust-free surface. They could get relief from what is 40% to either 50 or 60% based on special circumstances from the zoning administrator. To your point, it is similar but different than, yes, an exception to our zoning code, which you would then generally go through the Board of Adjustment.
So, Vice Mayor, if I could continue. So I guess that's what I'm trying to, and I'm not trying to be an obstacle, I'm just trying to understand that there is a process right now. For example, somebody who bought a house on a cul-de-sac lot and wants to pour a secondary driveway or something for additional parking. There is a process to do that right now if you're exceeding lot coverage, but you would take that to the Board of Adjustment, or you're saying that there is no, I'm just trying to understand if there's a process now in place and we're changing it, or if there is no process.
If I may, Council, I had a conversation with our planning and zoning director, and the understanding I received was that, no, those are not, these type of parking things are not, would not go through the Board of Adjustments. What you're talking about is when it affects a zoning issue. In other words, so many feet from the wall, whatever. When it has a zoning code that addresses that issue, then you want a variance from the zoning code, you go to the Board of Adjustment. But when you are talking now, we're talking about moving the parking out of the zoning code and putting it into a parking or traffic code, then that no longer applies, and so the Board of Adjustment would not be an appropriate board to go to for a parking issue.
So, Mayor, if I could, but I mean, the lot coverage is part of our zoning code, isn't it?
Mayor and Council, correct. The lot coverage element of it is. The unique element of it, though, and so the committee tried to rightfully provide some relief, because the unique element of an exemption from the zoning code from the Board of Adjustment is it can't be self-imposed. And when you're speaking about creating more parking, you are self-imposing it. Unless, of course, there's some geographical feature that runs through the side yard that prevents you from otherwise building in what could be within that 40%.
I understand that, Mayor. So, but my point is, I guess I'm trying to understand, is you're taking something that now literally would be a public process, because I guess it would fail at, but I'm not, so you're saying it wouldn't qualify for Board of Adjustment? Because if you bought it and were unaware, I guess it's still self-imposed, that you should find out what the lot coverage is.
Mayor and Council, candidly, the issue is this. The underlying genesis of why we got here was the fact that people were parking in their front yard, and a zoning administrator provided relief saying, you can do it. That's the only reason why technically we are here. There are other issues that we're dealing with now, and I want to make sure the council understands, if you allow a relief mechanism, and I'm not opposed to it, I understand there are circumstances that would be necessary. You will have circumstances where people have the ability to provide or to seek and be provided relief to a parking code. One of the greatest challenges for code enforcement is actually enforcement, and that's because of the fact we try to enforce in a fair and consistent manner. And that becomes very difficult because at times what happens is when people call and complain, their expectation is we drive down the street with blinders on. And we ignore everything that goes down and we just focus on one parcel of property. And we're trying to alleviate those challenges. So is the relief available? It is. I think that there's measured relief that can be available, but part of this, candidly, I don't know what direction to take you. I mean, really the reason why I'm here is I don't know what direction to take you all on all of this, so I need your feedback.
Mayor? My concern, especially with items 1 and 2, we are vesting our code director or administrator or whomever with a great deal of power. And the only process available is subjective through that one entity, that one staff person. To me, just as an ordinary citizen, when I read the words irregularly shaped lots, I think of something that isn't a square or isn't a pie shaped. Anything beyond that would be irregularly shaped. I think it needs further clarification and definition as to what an irregularly shaped lot is. And that would preclude the zoning or the code administrator from determining, first of all, whether it's an irregularly shaped lot or not. With regard to item 2, additional exceptions, unique conditions, I think we need to further define and provide some examples of what a unique condition would be. And kind of box in so that not everything under the sun can be loosely interpreted as a unique condition. I don't have any problems with extension to load or unload or temporary occupancy. Those are more technical and easily understood issues. But if we're going to give the zoning administrator, or the planning director, I shouldn't say the zoning administrator, the planning director, the authority to decide these issues, I would like a more narrowly tailored set of guidelines for that person. So that's my only comment, is that I'm concerned that items 1 and 2 are too loosey-goosey for me, and most people will not have any clue as to what items 1 and 2 actually mean. Thank you.
I took it as the regular shaped lots would be pie shaped. That's the way I took it. Anybody tell us?
No, nobody knows. I mean,
Well, somebody came up with that verbiage, so.
Mayor and Council, that is part of, we're not going to answer that question. You've given us the feedback. We can take that. We can work with Mrs. Collins. We can work with code. That's the kind of stuff where I don't need a definitive answer. I need just some direction on where you would like us to take this. So to the extent if you want more criteria, that's great. We'll put the criteria together. We can bring that back. Because one of the challenges I've been faced with is to review this, and it's just been a big kind of, it's like a box of suggestions. And again, this is your committee, and I'm asking you what you want to do. Go ahead.
Are we going to go through these one by one, or do you want to know what we think about all 4 of these? I just want to.
There's an element of this. If the council believes that there's a more efficient way to handle this, I am open to it. I'm very open to it. I'm just trying to. We're at that point in time. I'm trying to transition from a recommendation to what can I bring in front of the council, where it's not presumptuous that I'm telling you what it needs to be, or vice versa. So I'm open to any suggestions if the council believes there's a different way to facilitate this.
Okay, Mayor, I have some questions about temporary occupancy. What exactly do you mean? That somebody can come from wherever and park an RV in my driveway and live in it? And for how long? Under, you know, do I need to get some sort of a permit for that? Are they going to be plugging into, you know, I just really not even sure what that means.
Mayor, council member, the proposal that came out of the committee was recreational vehicles shall be prohibited for human occupancy as a permanent residence. Any temporary occupancy shall be required to obtain a temporary occupancy permit from the Development Services Department.
For how long of a period, though? I mean, is it good for 2 weeks? Or, I mean, I would think that we would want to have some standards that somebody can't just say, well, it's open-ended.
Mayor and council member,
We dealt with
I'm
this in
looking
my
just at the initial
neighborhood, so.
question. I'm just looking at the initial question. Is this something that council is willing to consider? Is that for recreational vehicles in a driveway that is temporary occupancy, something that we would include?
Well, let me ask you a question. I know that if you have a recreational vehicle, trailer or motorhome, either one, you have to currently keep a current license plate on it, and that allows you to have an RV. Unlike a mobile home, which once it's set and the axles are removed and the hitch is removed, it is no longer a mobile home, therefore it doesn't have to have a license plate.
Only
So
if you get
statute already requires a license plate if it's current. Can we actually ask for an additional permit or charge an additional fee?
I was just going to say on the mobile homes, Mayor, if I could, that you'd literally have to get an affidavit of a fixture, though, for that not to be still considered a mobile home.
Mayor and council, if I
Of
may.
the affidavit.
I'm going to try to be hyper-focused on this. All this has to do with is if somebody pulls a recreational vehicle in their driveway to park it. So don't worry about pulling the plate. Hopefully they don't pull the axles off, because they've gone from temporary usage, they're now storing it in their driveway.
But that wasn't my point.
Okay.
My point is if you have a current license plate on it now, by state law, that is a mobile home, or RV or whatever you want to call it, you can live in it. So our question is can we charge an additional fee on top of that for somebody that already has the license plate? That's what I'm trying to find out.
No, the question
Or do we want to
is
allow
that when somebody, I'm going to use the Councilmember Aldama, somebody comes to Councilmember Aldama's with their mobile home, and they pull up into his driveway, and they're going to stay there for 10 days, and they pull out a water hose, and they pull out an electric. That's what we're talking, it's temporary occupancy where they will be parked somewhere on the property. Even if it's it's a side yard or somewhere like that. They're lawfully parked. The issue is that they're parked in a recreational vehicle and they're temporarily occupying it.
Mayor? I think that's, my opinion, I think that's a terrible idea. I mean, unless it was somehow being able to be parked where you're already allowed to park an RV, where it's shielded and screened and can't be seen, and nobody's even gonna know somebody's living in it, but otherwise, if you'd be allowing people to do it in their driveway, I don't think it's a very good idea. There's other places where people can park their motorhome or recreational vehicle for temporary occupancy. So I don't think it's I just think that it's not a good thing to do for the neighborhood.
I think the question is,
You know, and obviously the considerations would make a difference. One of which might be what Councilmember Clark raised as to the property in question. And there's certain zoning classifications of agriculture